and I'm still admitting people. I'll worry about admitting people. Amanda will worry about presenting her very interesting chapter. I will introduce Amanda. So Amanda Wolf, former editor of Operant Subjectivity, which is when I met her, that's what she was doing. She's associate professor in the School of Government at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. And she is the academic program leader for the master's degrees in public policy and public management. Her discovery of Q methodology in the late 1990s has profoundly influenced her approach to teaching policy methods and practice to policy professionals with varied backgrounds supporting higher degree research students and researching in areas such as transferable lesson learning from cases, child well-being, teaching complexity, and anticipatory policy analysis. I just want to say that Amanda always has the most interesting way of bringing new insights to Q, and it's always a pleasure to talk to her and read the various things that she has written. And with that, I will pass it to Amanda.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, for that introduction. And kia ora, everyone. Greetings from a very beautiful sunny morning in Wellington, Tuesday morning. So if you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, I can tell you it'll be beautiful and sunny in the morning. Thanks to all the organizers for this fabulous seminar speaker series. And of course, to Sue and the editors of the book from which all these chapters are extracted. And thanks also to Rita, who's been my minder for getting this up and running, and really sorry that she doesn't have internet at the moment to be along. So I thought I would start by just making a few comments about why this chapter. And the first point really gets to something in my own research and writing practice, but I thought would be something I could share with the group here. I see writing as a great way to explore a curiosity. If there's something niggling in the back of your head, setting up a writing project is a fantastic way to sort things out. And I found it particularly useful in the whole space of Q methodology, where, Lord knows there are plenty of curiosities for us to dig into. In this case, it was about Q sorting. And what I noticed was that Q sorting had not received critical methodological attention. If people know nothing else about Q methodology, they know the Q sort. It's just kind of the emblematic signal that this is a Q methodology project. But beyond that, it's sort of an empty space. Thirdly, a focus on methodology was my way to recognize and thank Stephen Brown in the context of this book. As you will all, I'm sure, know, Steve has been persistent in helping us understand the difference between the technique of data collection through Q sorts, the method or the mechanics of factor analysis, and the methodology, which is the whole conceptual and philosophical system or frameworks through which the application of method and technique are given their due course. A fourth reason why I was pursuing this Q sorting curiosity was what, in my observation, a proliferation of Q studies that reveal tensions with Stevenson's methodology. And I've always been really curious about just why that is. And finally, I hoped to have some small contribution to improve understanding and practice. So I want to turn to next something that Bob Braswell said in the first seminar in this series, when he described Q sorting as locking in the magic of the combination of a Q set with a P set. And, clearly there's something there. If magic happens, we can look at why that happens. And I also see Q sorting as something like a hinge point in a research project, where before Q sorting, The researcher has to set objectives, write a research question, estimate the concourse, select a P and Q set, prepare materials. Q-sort happens, and then afterwards, ideally, a post-sort interview, various analyses are run, interpretations, drawing out conclusions relative to those interpretations, and so on. So I thought there was something to look at there. What is it about that magic? And on this next slide, I'm inviting you to just take a moment to consider what I'm calling subjectivity in action. So this is a photo I took in December. It's a walk, it's a side track off one of the world famous walking tracks in New Zealand, in the South Island, walking up to Conical Hill. I'm on this track. And my mental life, as William James has written, and as we have seen quoted quite a bit, he refers to as like a bird's life, alternations of flights and perchings. So as a person is walking along on a beautiful track, their mental life is continuously going through these flittings and perchings, finding beautiful places to perch and stay for a while, finding also perches that one is not interested in and one might reject, such as seeing trash alongside the track as you're walking along. So I'm starting our thinking from the perspective of a person whose subjectivity we're interested in. If we want to study subjectivity, we need to help capture what's going on when we know and we can recognize subjectivity in action. So how do we help these birds as they're flitting along? The first thing I think is that we want to enable Q sorters to flit around easily, but without being blown too far off course. If we're interested in capturing their subjectivity, we want to encourage their exploration, but we don't want them going off on a tangent. We need to enable them to see perches of various levels of interest and disinterest. We need to bring them somehow to that metaphorical mountain. If the mountain or that scene I showed you represents the concourse about which we're interested in their perspectives, we have to bring them there and give them a clear task. And to do this, I think, well, my curiosity led me to go a little bit deeper into Q sorting. So we can start with the fundamentals and just recognize some of what these fundamentals are all about. First of all, Q sorting is an activity. It is not just on the surface an activity of sorting out cards into piles and grids and so on, but it's an activity in which the sorter is engaged in modeling and engaging with the items in order to create the model. So it's a fairly sophisticated activity. Secondly, the Q sorting works, if you will, through the person making a series of comparative judgments. And as they're making those judgments, they're imbuing each of the statements with a certain element of their own subjectivity, if you will. A certain meaning comes into their comparison as they go through the process of sorting out and ending up with a grid. And the Q sort as the outcome, it becomes the Q sort itself becomes the outcome of that activity of sorting through the workings. So the data becomes a captured view of how our bird has decided to enjoy perches and reject perches in their flitting around in the concourse. Okay, so going back to what I said about the distinction between technique, method, and methodology, we've got technique right at the top of this, this pyramid that is often used to represent philosophy of science. And I think it's pretty clear that we can't have the technique somehow off floating in the cloud. So even if it is just technique, we can gain quite a bit of insight by going down into our iceberg a bit. So that's what I've done. And I should have, it wasn't in my bio that Sue so nicely read out, but I did do a first degree in philosophy, and I haven't been able to leave it entirely behind as I've gone through my studies in Q methodology. So first, I want to consider Q sorting ontologically. And first, we can look at on the left-hand side of the diagram. And we recognize that a Q sort shows a person's point of view as it naturally exists, fixed in the form of the ranked statements. So there's a subjective reality that we are making visible to us via the Q sorting process. But at the same time, the Q sort fixes and makes available to the researcher for study what I'm calling a slice of the concourse. And that concourse, which I've represented here as this mountain, which can be viewed from different sides, it's still the same mountain, it's still the same concourse, it's still whatever is socially and collectively available about whatever the mountain represents, but individuals can see it from different perspectives. And those different perspectives are also real and are also of tremendous interest in today's selection and collection of Q methodology studies, where a very typical study is looking at the perspectives of some X group of people on some Y topic. So it is actually focusing on what I've represented there by the arrows in the concourse. So I think there's both of these realities in play at the ontological level. Now we move up a level in our pyramid and we get to the epistemological lens. And here what we are considering is that we're interested in sort of what makes or what the magic that happens is actually making in knowledge terms. So we just can start with looking at a single card that a person might pull out from the pile, the first card they look at maybe. And the words on that card have only potential meaning in the infinite concourse until the sorter decides what meaning that card has in their perspective. And so what's happening is the sorter is looking at that statement for where it fits or what it represents from the concourse as they see it, which of course is a function of what they're bringing to that process, what is the function of their relative situatedness in that concourse, and therefore leading to where they place that card in the grid. So what we have is this involved process of the person considering the concourse as represented by the statements and ending up by placing all the cards in a particular grid that gives that pattern some meaning. So now we get to what Q sorting is methodologically. So as we know, going up our pyramid, ontology and epistemology combine to give us an articulation of methodology. So Q sorting is an event or an experience. It engages the sorters with where they are, where they're coming from in the social context. And they both look at the statements and consider the meaning of what they're reading or taking in. And they're also creating something, a new pattern, a new way of organizing those items, which is self-referent and meaningful, and the relationships between those relationships are coming through. So I see Q sorting as an occasion. It's something that happens in a person's life as they're going along. So it's in a place and time. It is inclusive of everything that has led the sorter to be there. They're already probably primed to think about your topic because they've turned up to do this study. The particular concourse from which the Q set was drawn, and the conditions set by the researcher to guide the sorting. As we know, the statements have to be available to the sorters, and the sorter is in a particular orientation towards the task and the conditions that they're given to create the Q-sort grid. I just very briefly wanted to touch on this issue of the tensions that I have used to tease out these ontological and epistemological features, I suppose. And my view is that these tensions are bridgeable if they even exist in any kind of important way. But I think my conclusion from looking at what I've described as these ontological and epistemological tensions is that Q methodology, properly approached, is entirely up to the job and maybe even all the richer for working in this philosophically challenging kind of space. And I think it just suggests that it's really important for researchers to take the Q sorting really, really seriously. And I won't go into it in detail here because I would probably do injustice to the exemplars that I was drawing on in the chapter. But that leads me then to just move up, I suppose, in our iceberg to materials and methods. This first line, of course, is not going to surprise a single person in this room, but I think it bears emphasizing, which is why I've bolded and italicized it. The items must represent a single well-defined concourse. It is so entirely easy and so often seen for an entire Q study to fall over because of what's gone on in item selection, never mind anything else that can go wrong in Q sorting. So I just really wanted to emphasize that point. And the second point I wanted to emphasize is that condition of instruction has two elements to it. And the second one is by far the more important one. The first one is the mechanical instructions, which we all know off by heart. Make 3 piles, sort from most to most, and so on. It just tells people the mechanics of creating the grid. But the conditioning factor is what I mentioned earlier on, is enabling the sorter to be where we want them to be, looking at the concourse in the way we want them to be looking at it, and having a really clear understanding of what they are meant to be showing us. So we need to open up that concourse. We need to point our little bird in the right direction and give them an instruction that allows themselves to engage their subjectivity and model it with the items that we've given them. So, as I've said, if the Q sorts are somehow bad, no analysis can salvage much from that. You can try. But I want to look a little bit further into exactly how the Q sorts work in terms of providing insights to the researcher. So for that to happen, the pattern of cards that we're getting in the Q sort can't be random. They can't be arbitrary. There's something behind the workings of the sorter that we want to be able to see. So I wanted to just pause and say, well, how exactly does the sorter put meaning into that Q sort? And it can happen abductively, where the sorter just starts with one card, which connects to another card, which starts connecting, and all of a sudden the whole is coming clear. And those of us who've done a lot of Q sorts with people have examples of where we've seen the person go through that process, much like one might go through a quick inventory of your ideas when someone asks you if a particular movie was any good. You pick up little snippets and they suddenly cohere into something that gives you a sense of what's going on there. A moment ago, I used that metaphor of reading and writing as a way of describing what's going on in the Q sort process. But we can also look at the Q sort as the creation, as an authored artifact of somebody who is also a reader interacting with the raw materials, and in doing so informed by their prior experience and preconceptions, whatever sort of cultural signals they're picking up on, rhetoric, expressions, and so on. And the outcome is a meaning for the sorter, ideally, relevant to their current situation, and then somehow transposed into the Q-sort narrative or picture. So they use those materials to create something for us. And that process is capturing not just a pattern of cards and statements, but patterning the voice of the person who has created that, as if we were talking with them and experiencing what's going on for them. So if meaning goes in, meaning has to come out. It's problematic to think of this as mechanical. So I somehow dump my subjectivity into a Q-sort and you somehow come along and you pull it out again. I don't think that's right. And I think it's quite significant, the depth to which this interactivity between what the sorter has done and what the researcher does, it needs to be emphasized. So clearly we don't see the sorter's meaning directly, but we are aware that they have put something of their subjectivity there. And it's in language, and that's a challenge for us, but it also is an enabler for us. So I see the getting the meaning out as an intensely dialogical and interactive relational process. So it starts with the social communicative potentiality of the concourse and the sample. It continues through the self-referential dialogue of the sorter's work with the statements, which we don't usually observe, we can't observe, but we know is going on in their heads as they're working. Self-referent conversations in a post-sort interview, and then the researcher's own relational dialogue with their own milieu, their own research setting, what they know, what theories they're interested in, what they see coming through, what becomes prominent for them. And it is, overlapping with what the Q-sorters have provided to generate some understanding. And Sue, I think that's probably about where I'll leave it. Yeah. So I'll turn this off. I did want to have plenty of time for questions and discussion, and I certainly didn't want to use up any technical fluff time we might have.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda. That was wonderful. All right, so we will open up the floor for questions, or you can write them into the chat box if you prefer.
Sue, you want me to run this, or do you want to call on people?
Whatever you'd like.
Yeah. Nori, thanks for raising your hand. Nice to see you.
Hi, Amanda, and hi, everyone. Thanks to see you all. It is really a great platform here to see people, actually. Amanda, if you mentioned, thank you very much for the great presentation. You mentioned at one slide that you said something about bad Q-sorts. I'm not quite sure I get that. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I should watch my mouth sometimes. I think Q-sorts can fail for a number of reasons. They can fail if they haven't created, if the sorter has not been provided a balanced and representative sample of the concourse of interest. They can fail if the concourse or the Q sample has come from a muddied or an unclear concourse, where there's a mix of statements of fact and statements of opinion, where the sorting instructions are from most to least instead of most to most, and for a whole host of other reasons that make it really hard to salvage the kinds of insights that a well-designed Q data collection step would enable. So I'm not suggesting that there's a bad Q sort in the sense of somebody's pattern of views is rejected for some reason or is amoral or whatever. It's just it's a series of technical failures that can lead to data that isn't as high quality as we would want it to be.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you. Looks like we have, I have to read all these names. Vivian, hello.
Oh, hi, and thank you so much. This is really, really good for me. So my question is sort of twofold. And one, you talked about the concourse being, correct me if I got this wrong, having a single focus, or like a single topic, but can that topic have different components within it by which you can construct a Q sort that addresses the different components within that one topic? That's the first question. And the second question is regarding the conditions of instructions. Are the conditions of instructions designed to sort of guide the sorter into how they should be looking at the concourse?
Thanks very much. Those are fantastic questions. It's really hard to answer your first question. It's one of those things like you know it when you see it, and mostly you know it when you see it causing trouble. But if, just to take a really simple metaphor for this, if you're interested in people's perceptions of what makes a good breakfast, say, and I don't know, breakfast fruit, who knows? And you give them, let's just say fruit. There's 5,000 whatever they call them, species, varieties, that's the word I wanted, of apples, okay? And you give people a whole set of apples and you ask them to sort out which apples they find tastier. If you were to throw in one orange, that would be from a different concourse. So if we expand that out to the normal kinds of research studies, where we have trouble is where we ask people to describe which factual conditions in their lives matter most to them. And they then rank subjectively how they value facts of their lives with, say, normative judgments of an ideal life. So they're faced with an instruction to decide between I value my life because it has an opportunity to, because I'm employed. Employment is important to my life, with a statement that says, ideally, I would like to live in a world where everyone is employed. So we've got a normative and a factual statement. And you don't quite know how, if the concourse was all about ideals and norms, it would be one thing. And if it was all about facts, it would be another thing. Those perhaps aren't as crisp of illustrations as I might like, but you do know it when you see it. And when people are forced to make choices between an apple and an orange, when you don't want that to be happening. Your second question about the condition of instruction. Yes, I think it is really important for you to let the Q sorter know who they are in a way. They are someone whose subjective perspective you're interested in. They are someone whose ideal perspectives you're interested in. They're someone who you're interested in what they experience as a member of a group, for example. So variations on how you let the person know what the task is about. You would see this more clearly in single NQ studies, where a single sorter is asked to sort the cards several times with different conditions. But that doesn't mean in a single go, you don't also have a condition where you help the person say more than do you agree or disagree? Because a loose, unanchored agree, disagree instruction leaves it wide open. Do I agree this is the way it is, or do I agree this is the way it should be? So you clarify exactly what you want them to be, how you want them to be approaching the task.
Thank you so much.